Hey guys, Connor Richards of Poker News here at NAPT Las Vegas, and this is Life Outside Poker. My guest for this episode is poker coach Jonathan Little, who I talked to about running up a six-figure bankroll in his early 20s, winning 2 WPT titles in under 2 years, and starting a poker training site. We also talked about his recent runs inside the PokerGO Studio that saw him winning the PokerGO Cup. Let's get into it. Jonathan, thanks so much for being here. Really looking forward to talking to you today.
Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot that we're going to get into, but just to give you a little background, I really got into poker in 2019, and you specifically were the first poker coach who I came across. I remember my dad sent me like a live stream seminar that you were doing, and I didn't realize that there was all this poker strategy, and so I watched a lot of those videos, and so, here 5 years later or whatever to talk to you, super honored, and there's a lot to get into, but let's go back before that. You grew up in Florida and you started playing poker pretty young, either as like a high school student or college student.
Yeah, I was 17 or 18. I don't remember exactly when it was. I played a lot of Magic the Gathering as a kid. And after some of the Magic the Gathering tournaments, a guy wanted to play a $1 buy-in poker tournament with like 6 or 8 people. And he beat us very, very frequently. And I realized poker's probably a skill game like chess or Magic the Gathering or lots of other strategy games. And I was always pretty good at those. So I bought all the poker books I could. I put $50 online on an online site, and I slowly ground it out playing Limit Hold'em.
So let's talk about Magic the Gathering, because I remember hearing that you're big into that. For those who don't know, explain what Magic the Gathering is.
Magic the Gathering is a trading card game where you buy packs of cards, and those cards are random. Some of them are valuable, some of them are not valuable. And the cards are collectible, kind of like baseball cards, but they also have utility in that you can play them in the game. And there are various formats of Magic. There are formats that use only the newest cards, formats that use the oldest cards. And I played a lot of that as a kid.
And you mentioned that, so you were buying poker books and studying and learning all the theory. Now that's something that you've gotten into. You've written plenty of poker books yourself. But back then, what sort of resources were there?
There were not very many resources. There was Super System, which, was kind of like a primer for various games. And the only game that had a lot of literature written about it was Limit Hold'em by 2+2. And if you just studied that and played online back in the day, you would absolutely destroy your opponents because they did not know what they were doing. And if you know what you're doing and they don't, you will win. And so back then, online was very, very soft. But eventually, Limit Hold'em got a little bit tougher, and No Limit became more popular. And there was like nothing written about No Limit Hold'em back then. So I eventually moved from Limit Hold'em to Sit and Goes, which are 9-handed tournaments, and I got very good at that using various analytical programs online that existed way back then, which basically told you if you should go all in or fold. I got really good at going all in or fold, which is not how you should actually play final tables or Sit and Goes, but that's all we knew back then. And that worked out really well. By the time I was 21, I turned my $50 into about $350,000 playing mostly Sit and Goes, and then I started playing live poker.
So that was the moment you dropped out of school, right? And you decided this is what I'm going to do professionally?
I don't know if I've decided that yet today. I was going to college. Actually, I had 2 jobs, one at an airport, one at a comic book store. And I quit the comic book store, then I quit the airport, and then eventually I quit college. And essentially it was just a math problem at the end of the day. I was making something like $20,000 a month back then playing online poker kind of consistently for like 6 months before I quit my $10 an hour job. And then shortly after that, I decided to quit college because it was taking up a lot of time. And I guess my aspirations out of college would be to get some sort of an engineering job making $50K a year. But here I am sitting here making, even if it's $100K a year playing online, it's a good deal, right? And I set aside money in case I wanted to go back to school, in case things went poorly. I bought a condominium, so I was kind of like setting myself up within reason. I showed my parents my results of like, here, I'm consistently winning. It's basically impossible for me to not be a decent winner in this. And I laid out the plan, and I did it. But I don't know if there was ever a moment where I said, okay, I'm going to become a professional poker player now. It more just happened. And I think that's how a lot of people should go about getting into poker. They need to take it as a hobby, work hard at it if that's what you like doing. And once you've consistently proven that you're a winner in your spare time, then you can start spending more of your, call it main time, playing poker, because a lot of people just think, okay, I'm going to all of a sudden become a poker player. And it does not work like that. If you are not a winning poker player, you should not try to become a professional poker player.
So sticking with those early days of online grinding, something that not everyone may know is that one close friend that you had online was Shannon Shorr, who, we're doing this interview here in Las Vegas at NAPT. Shannon was here as well. I know he was playing the main event. So, 20 or so years later, both of you are still around. But yeah, how did you first meet Shannon?
I met Shannon in the online sit and go chat room. We would play online sit and goes together, and he would consistently berate the fish. The fish would get lucky on him, and he would get mad. He would type nonsense to them in the chat. And back then, the tables would not close if people were still at the table. So we took first and second in a sit and go. We played a lot of these, so we were often playing together. And I talked in the chat. I said, hey, message me on America Online Instant Messenger way back in the day. He did. I told him to stop berating the fish. We became good friends, and then we traveled a lot together. We were roommates, essentially, whenever we traveled for quite a few years.
It's funny because Shannon Shorr, I can't really imagine him berating people. I've interviewed him before. He seems really nice. I can't picture that.
A lot of people are nice until they get on the internet and they start losing thousands of dollars to random people who play poorly, and then they go off the deep end. And I think a lot of, call it newer poker players, not necessarily young, but just newer in general, they don't necessarily understand the swings of the game. And I mean, I struggled with this issue as well. I think everybody does, especially when they have seen that they can win, and then all of a sudden they go on some sort of big downswing. They're like, why is this happening? It's like the world is ending. And you see a lot of small and mid-stakes poker players who are struggling to move up feel disgruntled and bitter because they think they should be doing better. And I think that happens to a lot of people. And as you, I guess, get beaten up enough at poker and things go poorly often enough, you realize this is normal. This will happen sometimes. And that's okay. I mean, I've had pretty bad runs. I've had pretty great runs. And I think having the bad runs is important for your growth as a poker player, because then you realize what is possible. And once you realize what's possible, then you're not so worried about the inevitable bad swings. A long time ago, someone said something to me. It was like, something along the lines of, at some point in your poker career, you're going to run far worse than you ever thought possible. And, I've ran pretty bad sometimes, and it can get worse. And I recognize it can get worse. So when that happens, I will be fine because I'm properly bankrolled, and I think I have an edge in the game pretty clearly. And it's just a process of putting in a lot of volume at that point.
In those early years of running up that bankroll, did you have any big downswings, or were there any moments where it was scary?
So when I moved from limit hold'em to sit and goes, I got to the biggest games they had online back then, which was 30-60 limit hold'em, and I was kind of struggling to beat 30-60 limit hold'em back then. And so then I moved to sit and goes, and that went well for the most part. As soon as I bought my condominium and quit my job, I went on something like a $80K downswing, and what I decided to do was move down to $10 buy-in games instead of the $500 games I was playing, and win 100 buy-ins at every level. So 100 at the 10s, 100 at the 20s, 30s, 50s, 100s, and then I got back to the top. But I wanted to clearly prove I am profitable at this. Otherwise, because I realized I could just be getting lucky for 10,000 sit and goes or whatever. Like maybe it happens. Or maybe I'd gotten bad, or maybe the game was tougher for whatever reason. And so I wanted to do my best to try to prove that I was a winning player. But I came out of that downswing and survived. And also whenever I turned 21 and I started playing live poker, I did not really know how to play live tournaments or tournaments in general, because I was used to playing sit and goes where the top 3 people out of 10 get in the money, 30% of the field, right? Whereas in live poker tournaments, back in the day, it was like the top 10% get in the money with a very, very top-heavy structure. So you have to get in the top 0.1%. And that resulted in me not doing well at all in my first year of live tournaments because I did not fully understand the structure. And I lost like $200K in my first year of live poker. So I think that was good, though, because, again, it taught me what is possible, it taught me decent bankroll management, and also it didn't give me any unrealistic expectations. Because a lot of young people, when they get into poker, they win some free roll for $0, and they have $500, and they take the $500 and play a $500 buy-in tournament and win $20,000, and they just think that's normal. And I realized very quickly that's not normal, and it kept me sane.
That strategy you're talking about, how when you're on a downswing and you move down in stakes, win 100 buy-ins and then move up, that's pretty disciplined, especially for, in your teens or early 20s. Where'd that discipline come from? How did you, I would imagine most people are more reckless at that age and have more gamble, I guess.
I think I was always relatively frugal with money. I'm naturally kind of a conservative poker player. I'm generally conservative with some of my investments. And I don't want to go broke. That never seemed like a good idea to me. I'd rather have money than not have money. And again, I wasn't sure if I was going to actually be able to make it at poker. And in that scenario, I had maybe 150K left or something. And that would be plenty of money to go back to school, pay off a house. Back then, houses were cheap. And be set, right? So if I could stop the bleeding and be kind of set for life, or at least well off, that would be a pretty good result for a poker experiment back in the day. And yeah, that's it. I didn't want to lose all my money.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'd rather not lose all my money. A lot of the older poker players, and to be fair, people today, they take like pride in the fact that I've been broke and I got back on my feet and all this. Like, I don't do that. None of my friends have done that either. They've all kept pretty good bankroll management, and they've made it because they're not reckless. And that will result in you not having huge upswings, right? Because like there's $1 million buy-in tournaments. I could go play them, but that would be very reckless. I don't have $100 million yet, right? So I think it's better to grind the money up slowly than to try to get rich quickly. And poker provides a really, really good way to get rich slowly if you are willing to put in a volume.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, when you transitioned to live, it was tough for you and you lost $200K. I'm curious because we'll talk about this incredible World Poker Tour run you went on in 2007 and 2008, and we'll break that down. But how much time in between that and, when you were struggling with live poker, how long did it take you to get to that run?
It was about 1 year only.
Wow.
Okay. So not a lot of time, but some amount of time. And it takes a little while. So I lost like every tournament for the first year, and then I took 5th place in the PokerStars Caribbean Adventure, whenever that was, a long time ago. And that gave me some more money to play a little bit bigger, and then I continued to run hot.
Yeah, so we'll break it down. So that was January 2007. You got 5th in the PCA Championship for over $317,000. People will probably remember that final table because it was outside, right? I think super windy maybe.
Super windy. The cards were flying off the table. It's not the ideal setup for playing with cards, but we did it.
That was a fun one. So yeah, let's break down these major scores and then maybe you can talk about each of them. But so that was in January. Then in May 2007, you take down the WPT Mirage Poker Showdown. That was for over $1 million. That had a final table that had like Phil Ivey at it. I think you finished 5th. Just a few months later in October, you get 2nd in the WPT Niagara Falls Championship for $738,000. And then about a year later, November 2008, you win the WPT Finals Championship at Foxwoods for over $1.1 million. So, I don't know, about 2 years there, over $3 million. Just like, honestly, an incredible run. Yeah, break it down.
Yeah, that money's long gone. I mean, it's all a bit of a blur to me. I don't think I fully recognize the great spot I was in. Like nowadays, no one's winning $1 million in poker tournaments. It's like $10,000 buy-in tournaments. There aren't very many of them. Back then, there was a $10,000 tournament every week or two. And a lot of casinos had series that had a much more built-out series. Kind of like NAPT stops, right, where there's multiple big events. That happened a long time ago, but every 2 weeks. Whereas nowadays, it's every month and a half, or every 2 months, or whatever it is. And the fields were much larger, right? So I guess I didn't really get too down with the lows or too high with the highs. And in my brain, I would always show up and extract whatever expected value I was going to get out of the tournament. So whatever my ROI was, I presumed I'm going to go play that 10K and make 20% back then or 30% back then. And if I win $1 million, great. If I lose, great. It doesn't really make a difference to me. And I think that's a weird mindset for a lot of people to have, but I think it is a good one. I'm not the kind of player who needs to get like hyped up, like, oh, I can win $1 million in a day. Like, I don't think about that at all. I'm just showing up and trying to play good poker. And I've always been that way since, I guess I was playing the sit and goes back in the day, because I realized sometimes you're going to have bad days, even though you're playing great. So, but yeah, it was a bit of a blur. I showed up and played poker and ran hot.
How old were you then? Mid-20s?
I must have been 22.
Wow.
Maybe 22 or 23, something like that.
Were you one of the youngest players, or were there a lot of young guys then?
I was one of the younger players, but there were some amount of online kids, let's call them, who are all roughly my age now, and a lot of them are still around today. The people who were roughly my age were very fortunate in that poker was really booming back then, and we were all in high school or college and didn't have families or careers or anything like that took up a lot of time. So we all had a lot of time to study poker, play poker, travel, and all of that, and that gave us a big leg up over people who came before or later who maybe didn't have such soft games to play in, or people who already had families and careers that took up a lot of their time. So a lot of the best players today are roughly my age, and almost all of them started playing online poker a long time ago.
Wow. And so, yeah, you go on this crazy live run. Were you still playing a lot of online poker back then? And then a few years later, how did Black Friday impact your life?
I played a ton of online poker back then. I grinded sit and goes all day, every day, whenever I could, because the games were great. I was kind of fortunate with Black Friday. I'm trying to think, how did Black Friday actually happen? at that point, I was mostly transitioning to live tournaments at that point, and I didn't really have a whole lot of money online or anything like that whenever it happened. So it was bad for a lot of people, but it was not that bad for me personally, which is lucky. I mean, sometimes you're just like in a spot where it doesn't impact you as badly as it could have, and it didn't.
Did that influence your decision to want to get into coaching, maybe to, I don't know, like diversify a little bit or have more security?
So I have always posted on various internet forums, and I've always had students who came to me because they liked my post on the forums. And the way my first book came about actually is I would write articles for my students about whatever topic they asked me about. And when a publisher came to me asking me to write a book, I already had 300 pages worth of articles on specific topics. And so I have always learned a lot from other people in poker, and it seemed logical to me to try to help other people learn, right? It's like I learn a lot and then I give a lot. And I've done that for a long time. So I've had a training site based on sit and go since I was like 20 years old. And we eventually moved to multi-table tournaments as well, and then eventually to all no limit hold'em. But I really started ramping up the training site efforts about 10 years ago when my wife and I decided we wanted to have kids, and I wanted to be sure that I could stay home for a decent amount of time and not have to go play poker. And so I needed a way to make some money from home. So I decided to take the training site from kind of being like a hobby to a real thing, a real business. And we ramped it up. But I mean, kind of like I tell people in poker, don't just decide to become a professional poker player. I didn't decide to become a training site owner. It was a passion project for fun because I liked it. And then I eventually turned it into, I guess, call it a career.
And so, yeah, the site that you're with and that people will know you from is pokercoaching.com. But like you were mentioning, you did stuff before that. Was it a site, S&G Icons? Is that what it was?
sitandgoicons.com and then floattoturn.com. Two bad names for websites about poker training. Now we have pokercoaching.com. Makes a whole lot more sense. And it's good. I like it.
Yeah. Talk about some of the different things, because I've been a user of pokercoaching.com. Like I mentioned, I looked at a lot of your content, especially when I was first getting into poker. So you do different things like 3 mistakes that, players make at low stakes. And then there's also like hand history quizzes. But what are some of the different coaching formats, and what do you find works best to get people to retain information?
So we have a lot of different ways to get people in the door. We have books, we have YouTube videos like the top 3 mistakes, or how to play ace king when you miss, stuff like that. But once you get to the site, I think the thing that's the most beneficial is the tournament or cash game masterclass, which are roughly 40-hour-long courses where they're broken down into 10-minute segments with quizzes after each segment to make sure you're actually learning what's being taught. And I think that's the best way to go about getting good at the game. I actually hired one of my friends who owned a site that taught people college courses better than professors could to help me make my poker coaching site. And he didn't know anything about poker. I taught him the very, very basics. We made a fundamentals course that's free for everyone at pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. And then we built out those much larger courses. And it's designed by a guy who knows how to teach people stuff better than professors. And that's good. But I realize that people learn in all sorts of different ways. So like we have books and audio books and quizzes where we essentially put you in a spot and ask you how you would play this exact scenario. You commit to your answer, so you check raise it or whatever, right? And then the coach comes on and gives you feedback about if that was a good play or not. And that's very important. We just launched our Peak GTO trainer that has all sorts of spots put in there, and we're gonna have simulations ran by a lot of our poker coaching coaches who are using them, and they've been using them for years to crush the biggest stakes. And we have a new thing called the drill of the day, where we put you in a spot, we show you how the GTO would play it. We, again, test you and make sure that you fully understand why the game theory optimal solver does what it does, because you can't memorize all these spots, but you can memorize essentially rules and concepts that will allow you to roughly figure out how to play like the GTO solver in the real world close enough. And if you pick the best play or the second best play, every time you're going to be way better than most of your opponents.
You mentioned some of the coaches you work with. That's definitely something that stood out to me, is just kind of the quality of coaches who are on there, and an array of them over the years. Ones I think of are like Alexander Fitzgerald, Evan Jarvis, Faraz Jaka, Matt Affleck, Lexi Gavin Mather. How do you attract all these coaches, and also like what qualities do you think makes a good poker coach?
Yeah, you forgot Justin Saliba and Brock Wilson and Chris Brewer and David Peters and Shannon Shorr. I mean, these are all people who I interact with on a regular basis, and we're all friendly and we all play together a lot. And I guess they're happy to work with me and I want to work with them. I essentially go out and hire people who I want to learn from, at least at the highest stakes. And what makes a good coach? They can present their thoughts and their concepts in a way that's easy enough to understand. And we do a lot of things at the site to make the content creation easy for the coach, because I realize a lot of poker players are not graphic designers or PowerPoint creators or things like that. So we do our best to make the job for the coaches as easy as possible to get the information out of their head and into the student's head.
You mentioned Justin Saliba. That's a fun one because, you know, he's a young guy and really like just crushing at the highest stakes. And it does kind of seem like, I don't know, you caught on to him early and he's kind of risen up as he's been working with PokerCoaching.com.
Yeah, so Justin came to me maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and he was in college, and he said my Instagram was no good, and he wanted to help me make my Instagram social media better. And he was playing $50 buy-in cash games, so like small stakes online. He wanted to make my Instagram better in exchange for 1 hour of coaching a week. And so I said, sure. We started working together. He moved up by the time he was out of college to be playing 5-10 no limit online. When he got out of college, he said, either I'm going to become an engineer or you can pay me engineering money and I'll do whatever you want me to do. So I said, sure, I'm happy to pay. He eventually took over all my social media. I told him to move to Vegas, make friends with some people. I bought him a bunch of coaching from a lot of really good players. And now he's really good. And now he helps me substantially.
Yeah, and it's fun to see because we'll see the two of you battling in the PokerGO Studio and stuff like that, playing all these high-stakes events. So let's talk about that because you've had an incredible year inside the PokerGO Studio on the PGT Tour. But when did you start deciding to play those high rollers? Because those are definitely different than, I don't know, some of the big MTTs you took down back in the early days.
I don't know if I actually decided to play them. Again, it's not like you think I have to make a definitive decision to do this. I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants a lot of the time. The tournaments looked good, and the PokerGO Studio is amazingly nice. They rake almost nothing if you show up on time. They give you free food. It's a great environment. They televise or stream a lot of the content, which is good for me because I want to promote the training site. And yeah, I love playing in the PokerGO Studio. So I didn't play that much for like the last 5 or 6 years because I had 2 young kids. I was home a lot of the time. And it seemed like every time I would go and play in the PokerGO Studio, I would take a bunch of 5th places and 7th places, which was frustrating. But then over the last year, I've made a point to play more. And instead of busting in 5th, I've been winning. And it's good to win. But that goes back to like, there's a lot of variance in poker, right? Like whenever I was taking 7th place, I probably wasn't doing much different than I'm doing today, but just running a little bit bad towards the end. And it's nice to run well towards the end.
And yeah, you have been running well this year because in February, during the PokerGO Cup, you won 2 events. You won a 10K event for $229,000, and then you won the closer. It's a $25,000 event, so you won the overall title. Yeah, how fun was that run?
That was a lot of fun. Actually, poker coaching coach David Peters took 2nd place in that. He had 2 titles as well that series, and I think I had to win the final event to win it. So I'm glad I took that from him because he already has enough titles. And I mean, it was great. It was unexpected. I mean, whenever I go to play poker again, I'm not like thinking I'm going to win the series or anything like that. I'm thinking I'm going to go, show up, be well rested, be well studied, and I'm going to play my best. And I did it. I think back to that series, there were 2 tournaments where I had a bunch of chips on the bubble and then just like got kings against aces and lost 2 times in a row. But then the tournament I won, the 25K, I got down to like 2 big blinds on the bubble and then won every hand. So it's funny how 2 times I had all the chips and thought I was probably going to win. Then I just didn't. And then the other time I thought I was out and I wasn't. So again, lots of variance in poker.
And then also just like a month ago, you won a Poker Masters event in the studio. Is that right?
I barely remember that. Yeah, I won that. That was good. I took 2nd place in a Duel Now Invitational the other day. I won the Stormex Invitational last year. It's been a good run there recently.
So talk a little bit more about the PokerGO Studio. You mentioned it's a fun place to play, but we really do see a lot of regulars in there, people like Alex Foxen, Sean Winter. I don't know, who would you say are some of the tougher guys to play against in those fields?
Look, anyone who is playing there on a regular basis and succeeding is good. And the reason I think the fields are not so big at the PokerGO Studio, because they only get like 60 or 80 people, is that 40 of them are some of the best poker players in the world. And that makes it tough. But to some extent, my job as the owner of PokerCoaching.com is not to just make content, but to prove that I can compete against the best players in the world and succeed. And so that's really what I like in it. And I don't think I'm some sort of humongous winner in the games or anything, but it's very important to me to not just be a talking head on the internet and to instead show that I can play against the best players and do well.
Do you like the aspect of having, your students sweating you and doing updates on social media and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's nice to have lots of support from students, fans, etc. That's a very good thing. It's a lot of fun. I think some people let it, let's call it, bother them or weigh on them to some extent. It's important to accept the praise and love, but also not get distracted by all the other stuff. It's easy to get distracted by things that don't matter that much. And like you see people on Twitter fighting with each other and stuff during a poker tournament. It's like, what are you doing? Pay attention to the poker game. So you have to stay sane and reasonable about it. No, it's great to have fans.
Yeah, that's fun. So like I mentioned, we're here at NAPT Las Vegas, and something that's interesting about this is, I don't know if you've seen, but they've done a bunch of these like gold pass giveaways. There's tons of qualifiers in these events. I've interviewed a few people for stuff like this, and it's usually people who are playing like 10 or 20 times a bigger buy-in than they've ever played. And the field in this is really tough. This is a 5K with a lot of the best players. So with you being a poker coach, what's some advice that you would give to someone who is playing way above their average buy-in and against really tough players?
I mean, if you show up last minute and you have not studied adequately, just do what you normally do is the answer. Don't be scared or intimidated by the money. Don't think I need to sneak into the money because that's a lot of dollars. I realize that if you normally play $1 buy-in tournaments or something like that, and then here you are maybe getting a min cash for $7,500 or whatever it is, that is substantial. But at the same time, you don't want to lock up $7,500 in exchange for really hurting your chances to win $100,000 or $1 million or whatever it is. So you have to not really think about money when you're playing poker and poker tournaments. And I think a lot of people have trouble with that because they equate chips to dollars. I mean, today whenever I showed up, I snuck into day 2 with 2/3 of a starting stack, which was like 15 big blinds. But that was like $3,500 worth of equity. Some people look at that and think, oh man, I only have 2/3 of a starting stack. I should go all in and try to bust so I could re-enter and play the next day. But you have to realize I'm giving up $3,500 some portion of the time. And then I got to buy in for another $5,000. And I have to play the next day and get out of there with a lot of chips. And it doesn't make sense. So I showed up today with my 15 big blinds, got a double up, got broke, and left in 30 minutes. And I feel perfectly fine about it. So you have to be willing to accept the game that you are playing. And if you do win your way into some big tournament like this, once you get out there, just enjoy yourself. Make sure you're in good shape to play poker, but enjoy your trip to Vegas or wherever it is and have fun. I think a lot of people lose the tournament, then they're sad and depressed because they think that was their one shot. And maybe it was, but you're out here with a bunch of people who love poker and want to have fun, so you might as well.
Is that something you try and advise people on is, like, hey, take a break from poker. You're here in Vegas. Go get dinner or something?
It depends on what their goals are. I think a lot of people don't have their goals clearly outlined. This comes up during any sort of tournament series where a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to go out there with, let's say, $5,000. I'm going to play some tournaments and see how it goes. But they don't really think about scheduling their tournaments, which ones they definitely want to play, because some tournaments are way softer than others, or some are more important in your mind for whatever reason. And if you don't get to play a whole lot of poker tournament series and you are in a good mindset to play a lot of poker, I see no problem with playing a lot of poker, especially if it's a sporadic thing. But it really just depends on your priorities, right? Like if my only goal today was to make money playing poker, I would sit and grind every poker tournament. But that's not really my goal at this point. And I think for a lot of people, if they actually sit down and think about what they're trying to accomplish, that's not actually their goal either. They're trying to enjoy life. And so I do recommend people do their best to enjoy life.
It's good advice. So we're here in Las Vegas. You mentioned that part of the reason you got into coaching is spend time with your family. I believe you're based in New York. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess your kids are getting a little older now, but is it difficult to be traveling around to all these different stops?
So I have my wife's blessing to travel around to play poker. This year I've played more towards the end of the year than I initially anticipated because the PokerGO Tour has this leaderboard. You have to be in the top 40 to get into $1 million free roll, and I'm currently like number 37 or something. So I need to get a few more cashes probably to be sure I get to play this tournament. It's like a 25K buy-in free roll, right? So I've made a point to play a few series that I perhaps would not have naturally played. So that has resulted in me traveling a little bit more than I wanted to. I normally try to travel maybe 1.5 weeks out of 6 or 1.5 weeks out of 8. And that seems to be an okay balance. Whenever I'm home I'm working hard on poker coaching content, and after grinding that for like 6 weeks, I'm ready to get out of there. And then when I come to Vegas, after I play poker for a week and a half, I'm ready to get out of here. And it results in me not ever really being burnt out and always motivated to go do whatever is next.
So I do want to ask you about the Poker Hall of Fame because you're approaching eligibility. Are you 40 now, 39?
39.
So approaching eligibility, and when you look at the kind of criteria for getting in, look at like contribution to the game, I think of all your coaching, the longevity of your career, been around through a lot of different eras of poker, and are still crushing inside the poker studio against the toughest players. Reputation among players, we think of all the coaches who you've worked with and who you are close with. Is Poker Hall of Fame something that you've thought about? Is it on your mind?
I have not really considered it because in the criteria, it's hard to know what is valued, right? Like if being a popular content creator who helps people get in the game and enjoy the game more, if that is relevant to whoever's voting on it, then yes, I definitely should be up there. But compete at the highest levels, I mean, I'm not playing the 100Ks and the $1 million buy-in tournaments, and there are people who are my age, aging into that 40-year-old bracket who are, right? So they're probably more deserving of that criteria. And I'm kind of in a weird spot where I think there are two categories. Like one is call it not poker player, but poker business person. Mm-hmm. And then the other is poker player. And I probably don't qualify as a poker player, but I also may not qualify as a poker business person because I'm not like creating poker stars or creating a new poker site or passing laws that make poker better. You know what I mean? Like I'm not doing things that are overly substantial. So I'm in like this weird middle category that doesn't exist. So I would love to be in it, but at the same time, I'm not thinking about that.
Gotcha. Well, I just have a couple more kind of general questions before we wrap up here, but what is a book that you'd recommend people? And maybe we can talk about one of your own, but also something not written by you.
If you're trying to learn good, fundamentally sound poker, check out Mastering Small Stakes No Limit Hold'em. That is a good primer on how to think like a GTO solver would do and how to adjust to take advantage of what your opponent's doing correctly so that you can make those plays in-game and pick the best or second best play in most scenarios. In terms of books that I didn't write, about what?
Anything. Doesn't have to be poker.
I like a book called The 4-Hour Chef by Tim Ferriss. It teaches you how to cook. It's designed to teach you how to learn anything, but it uses cooking to teach you how to learn. And so now I know how to cook a bunch of random stuff that's all healthy and you can all cook kind of quickly and it's all delicious.
That's great advice. I'm sure most poker players could use a cookbook, so that's a good one.
I do think it's important for poker players to find hobbies that are not competitive. I think a lot of people, like myself included, inevitably fall into competitive games and everything they do is kind of competitive, whether it be something in the financial space or other games or whatnot. But I think it's important to have things that you can have very clear control over the results within reason. And things like fitness, you can kind of control your fitness goals. And things like cooking, you can kind of control that. Or creative aspects like art. I think it's important to not only do competitive things all the time because sometimes they'll all go poorly at the same time. And if they all go poorly at the same time, you wonder what you're doing with your life. Whereas if you have something you can fall back on that is just purely for fun and purely enjoyable and you actually like doing it for the sake of doing it, I think that helps out a lot of poker players mentally.
Great advice. And that goes along with the last thing, or the next thing I wanted to ask about, which is what is a piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self?
Enjoy yourself more. I used to, back in the day, my entire goal was to make money. And so I would sit and play poker all day, every day. And I would go travel to Las Vegas like here, and I would literally sit in the poker room for like 16 hours a day, every day. I would never go to dinner with anyone. I wouldn't go to shows. I wouldn't go have fun. I wouldn't do anything besides play poker. But to be fair, my priority, or at least the priority I thought I was supposed to have, was to make as much money as possible. And I think that stemmed from the fact that when I used to play sit and goes, I would only play like 10 hours a day, only 10 hours a day, but I could have played like 16. And when Black Friday happened, that income source, that was like a $400 an hour income source, just vanished. And I was like, oh my God, I could have made 50% more money if I just grinded a little bit harder. And I have made a point to try to grind hard at whatever I'm doing for the most part. But at the same time, as I've gotten a bit older, I've learned that enjoying yourself and getting life experiences is important as well.
Definitely.
It's tough though, because like I don't know if I am where I am today because I was such a degenerate grinder and grinded all day every day. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of poker players who do make it to the top have at least some phase of their life where that is their only goal, is to get like super duper good at poker, which translates to making money, which then gives you opportunities to do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's a dilemma. And I have heard that from people that, they say, hey, the reason I am here today is because I didn't have a life. And so, yeah, definitely a dilemma.
It's okay to not have a life for a little bit, but I did it for like 8 years, and that's probably a little bit too much. Probably 3 or 4 is okay.
Yeah. All right, last question here. So there's so much wisdom that can be drawn from poker and so many ways that poker applies to other aspects of life. So what is your favorite life lesson that can be drawn from poker?
Just that there's a lot of variance in stuff. I think a lot of people think that either something happens or it doesn't happen, but in reality, there's lots of variance. I mean, look at sports, right? In any sporting event, sportsbook makes odds, right? And in their mind, something's going to happen X percent, something's going to happen X percent, even though only one of them is going to happen this time. And that's the case with all sorts of stuff. And I think that teaches people in poker to not get so high or so low when things don't go their way. And I think if you don't go crazy when things are going poorly, that will usually work out better for you, because I think a lot of people sabotage themselves, especially in the times that are the most difficult.
Yeah, well, that's a great life lesson. Jonathan, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me.